"You really just pulled a gun on my daughter over lake access?" I said, stepping between them before my voice shook too much. Dean didn't answer. He just stood there, hand still hovering near his belt like he was waiting for a reason. That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with a homeowners association. I was dealing with a regime. "My name is Graham Leland. I'm a former firefighter now running a small contracting business out here by the lake. Nothing fancy, just a man who rebuilt the old dock with his own hands and thought that meant something. If you're watching this, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever tangled with an HOA, I want to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Trust me, this isn't a story you want to miss. The lake means more to me than just scenery. That dock out there, it's where my daughter Rachel caught her first bluegill, where my wife Elaine used to sit with a thermos of tea, sketching the tree line and charcoal on Sunday mornings before her cancer took her. There's a crooked bench out there, one I built the summer before Elaine passed. She called it her quiet place. The wood's warped now, sun-bleached and soft, but I won't fix it, not because I'm lazy, because every crack in it holds something I'm not ready to let go of. That bench was our spot. Mine and hers. It's where she asked me to take care of Rachel no matter what. It's where we scattered some of her ashes. That's why when Dean Rusk, this buzz-cut, neck-vein-throbbing HOA goon, showed up with his clipboard and sidearm, barking at my daughter for fishing off restricted dock property, something in me snapped. Not loud, just quiet. Final. I told him calmly to leave. Rachel didn't say a word. She's in Marine ROTC, tough as they come, but her eyes were wide, like she couldn't believe this was real life. And then Dean reached for his hip. It was slow but intentional. That's when I stepped in. He didn't draw the gun, but it was the threat of it, that subtle flex of power, the show of force masked as policy enforcement. He called it an automatic safety procedure. I called it what it was, an act of cowardice. The worst part, he left without consequences. Marcia Colburn, the HOA president, later called it a regrettable misunderstanding. Regrettable, like a typo in a newsletter, like my daughter's fear didn't matter. The thing about Marcia is, she wasn't always like this. When she first moved in, she smiled at everyone, hosted community brunches, handed out flyers about pet leash safety. But the second she got elected HOA president, it was like flipping a switch. Out came the fines, the arbitrary citations, the patrols. It was HOA by way of middle management tyranny. And now she had Dean, her personal pit bull in a blue golf cart with tinted windows and a badge he clearly took too seriously. They'd already fined me twice, once for leaving Rachel's kayak too close to the dock steps, another time for excessive dock lighting, whatever that means. I thought if I just played nice, fixed what they said, they'd move on. But this wasn't about rules, it was about control. That night, after the incident, I sat on Elaine's bench. Rachel came out, sat next to me. Neither of us said much. She just leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was little. "I could have handled him, Dad," she finally said. Her voice was steady, that marine steel in her spine. "I know," I said, "but you shouldn't have had to." She nodded. Then she looked out over the lake and whispered, "They don't belong here." She was right. It wasn't just about lake access anymore. It was about every inch of dignity they tried to take, every quiet moment they ruined, every small piece of my family they dismissed with a shrug and a rulebook. So I decided right then, if they wanted control so badly, I'd give it to them. But on my terms. Checkmate was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up to a yellow violation slip duct taped to my cabin door. Unapproved dock lighting. Fine. $175.00. Funny, I hadn't even turned the lights on last night. But that's how they do it. Fabricate the offense. Count on you being too tired or too proud to fight it. Marcia Colburn's signature was scrawled at the bottom in thick black ink like she was signing off on a mortgage. I pulled it off and laughed, quietly. Rachel came out behind me, a mug of coffee in one hand, face unreadable. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," she said. "No more than anyone else ever has, better than you. They don't have to," I muttered. "They think they've already won." That's the thing about HOA power trips. Once they taste control, they want more. And Marcia? She was drunk on it. Marcia lives at the top of Lakeview Circle, third house from the end. The one with the faux stone columns, year-round Halloween decorations, and a God bless our HOA sign out front that would have been funny if it weren't dead serious. She wasn't born into money, that much I know. No, she climbed up, scratched and clawed. And now she protects her little kingdom with the ferocity of someone afraid of losing it. The fines kept coming, one for improper kayak storage because Rachel left hers upright on the rack instead of on its side, another for unsightly extension cords, even though the only cord outside was my power drill charger tucked neatly under the workbench. I started logging them, scanning every piece of paper, date, time, photo, notes. I even started recording every encounter, just in case. Rachel joked that I was building a war room. I told her wars start with less. That afternoon I took a walk along the lake trail that loops behind the back lots. The air smelled like wet pine and warm earth. It reminded me of when Elaine and I first bought the cabin, back when we'd spend weekends fixing broken siding and eating sandwiches on that old wooden swing that used to hang from the pine just east of the dock. That swing broke in a storm 4 years ago. I never replaced it, couldn't bring myself to. That tree still leans slightly toward the water, like it's remembering too. Halfway down the trail, I noticed a car idling near the mailboxes. Dean Rusk, again, parked in the HOA golf cart, sunglasses on, pretending to check his phone. He watched me. Didn't move, just watched. When I got close enough to pass, I gave him a look and said, "You gonna write me up for walking too?" He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost like a smirk, almost like a threat. It was hard to tell with him, that was the problem. That night, I looked back over the log of fines and saw the pattern. They weren't random, they were tactical. Each one targeted something personal. My tools, Rachel's kayak, the lighting on Elaine's bench. Small things, but they added up. They were whittling me down, piece by piece. I went to the garage and pulled down the plastic tote marked Leland Legal. Inside were old tax records, blueprints, and, tucked in the bottom, a dusty manila folder with my father's handwriting on the tab, Lake Use Rights. I hadn't seen that folder in years. Elaine used to joke that if she ever went missing, I'd find her buried under one of my dad's filing systems. Inside were faded copies of the original deed, old letters, even a water usage map from the 1970 sets with his notes in the margins. His handwriting was blocky and confident, just like I remembered. Lake was always open, he'd scrawled in red ink. No one owns the water. That sentence hit like a hammer. I stayed up late going through it, page by page. My dad fought them once, before Marcia, before this new breed of rule pushers, and he lost. But he left a trail. Rachel came in around midnight and found me hunched over the table. "You okay?" "Your grandfather didn't like being pushed around either," I said, lifting the old folder. She leaned over and read the top line, then she looked at me and smiled. Not a big one, but the kind that says, "Yeah, let's finish what he started." The difference this time, I wasn't going to fight by their rules. I was going to rewrite them. I left the manila folder on the kitchen table the next morning, still open to my father's notes. Rachel was already gone, early shift at the bait shop on the north end of the lake. I stood there for a second, staring at his handwriting, wondering how he kept going after they wore him down. But I was learning something my father didn't have time to figure out. The HOA wasn't just a board, it was a machine. And machines leave patterns. I spent the next 2 hours walking the back edge of the neighborhood, clipboard in hand. I wasn't just checking fences or trail markings. I was watching how people acted when Dean or Marcia drove by. It was quiet, too quiet for a place that used to host community BBQs and kids running sprinkler relays in the cul-de-sacs. The air was stiff, eyes peeked through blinds, front porches were empty. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. That's when I spotted Ellen Myers, 3 houses down from mine. She was kneeling in her front flower bed, hands in the dirt, even though the garden was nothing but a row of dead hostas and dry mulch now. Not a single bloom. It was the same setup her late husband used to tend to every spring. Jack Myers, Vietnam vet, wore the same ball cap every day for 20 years and once won the HOA's Yard of the Year plaque back when the title actually meant something. Ellen didn't wave, didn't speak, just kept her eyes low and her hands busy. I approached the sidewalk. "Morning, Ellen." She nodded without looking up. "Beautiful day." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the edge of the stone border. I almost missed it. "You doing okay?" I asked. She nodded again, slower this time. I lowered my voice. "You were on the HOA board once, right? Back when my dad was still alive?" That got her. Her hands froze. She turned her head slightly, just enough that I could see her face. Pale, drawn, and scared. Not nervous. Scared. "They make it hard to say no," she said, "especially when they have something to hold over you." "What do they have on you?" She didn't answer. She just stood up, wiped her gloves off with unnecessary force, and said, "Sometimes it's not about what they know, it's about what people are afraid they'll say." Then she walked inside. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I thought she'd talk, but because of the way she didn't. She had something. She knew something. But fear, when planted deep enough, takes root. And this HOA, they'd been seeding it for years. Later that afternoon, Rachel came home early. She found me replacing one of the slats on the bench by the dock, not the crooked one. Elaine's bench was staying just the way it was. This was the smaller bench near the edge of the trail. Rachel sat down next to me, kicking her boots off, letting them dangle over the water. "You know," she said, "everyone's acting like you're stirring up trouble." "Let them," I replied. "I'm just saying," she added. "People are afraid. You're not." I looked at her. "I am. I'm afraid of what happens if we don't fight back. That fear's worse." She nodded and reached into her backpack, pulled out an envelope. "What's this?" "Someone slid it under the register this morning. No name, just said it was for you." I opened it. Inside was a photocopy of an HOA meeting agenda from 3 months ago. Half the page was blacked out, but the last bullet point was clear. "Discussion of firearm policies during property inspections. See attached." There was no attachment, no signature, no initials, just that one line, and a faint watermark at the bottom right. HOA internal use only. Rachel and I looked at each other. There was only one person who could have handed that off and known it would land in my hands. Ellen. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hands said it all. So now we had something, not enough for a legal move, but a crack, a sign of weakness in the wall. And if there's one thing I've learned from years of crawling into collapsed buildings and pulling people out, once you find a crack, you don't stop pushing. Ever had a neighbor stay quiet when you needed them most? Or maybe you've been that neighbor stuck between what's right and what's safe. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen an HOA cross the line. Because silence protects power, but stories expose it. The photocopied agenda sat on my kitchen counter like it was burning through the wood. I read it 10 times, each time slower than the last, hoping the missing attachment would magically appear if I stared long enough. I didn't. Instead, it echoed louder every time I read it. Discussion of firearm policies during property inspections. They weren't just covering for Dean's behavior. They were planning for it, authorizing it. That night, I scanned the document, added it to my log, and printed a fresh copy. Then I did something that made Rachel arch an eyebrow. I walked it down the road and slid it right into the HOA drop box. Let them know I knew. Let them feel the itch of uncertainty for once. The next morning, I got my answer. 2 uniformed men from the HOA security committee were standing on my porch when I stepped outside. Matching navy polos, clipboards, too polished to be maintenance, too stiff to be neighborly. "Morning," one of them said with a fake smile and mirrored sunglasses. "We're just doing a courtesy walkthrough, random lot checks." "This isn't a lot," I replied. "It's my home." "Then you've got nothing to worry about." I didn't invite them in, but I didn't slam the door either. I let them linger, let them know I wasn't scared, just done being polite. They walked the perimeter, writing notes, whispering too loudly for it to be real secrecy. One of them held a laser measurer up to my mailbox post. Rachel watched them from the dock. I could tell she wanted to come up, but I shook my head. Let them have their little performance. As they left, one handed me a pamphlet, Community Conduct and Safety Guidelines, with a highlighter line drawn across a sentence near the bottom. All residents must remain cooperative during official property evaluations. Noted. Later that afternoon, I headed into town for supplies. I wasn't fixing violations, I was fortifying. When I got back, Ellen was standing at my gate. She didn't look like someone planning a visit. She looked like someone who wasn't sure why she came, but couldn't stay home anymore. "I can't talk long," she said, eyes flicking up and down the street. "You already did," I said, "in your way." She nodded once, slowly. Then she pulled something from her jacket pocket. A photograph, faded, worn, folded into fourths. It was a group shot, an old HOA board photo. 10 people in lawn chairs, under a pavilion banner that read, "Annual Lakeview Governance Picnic 2009. Second from the left, Dean Rusk." "I thought he joined last year," I muttered. Elle didn't. "He's been around longer than Marcia," Ellen whispered. "Back then, he was just a grounds advisor, said he was volunteering. But when new elections came up, he never left. They kept moving him into different roles, never voted, never asked." "That's not legal." "No," she said, "it's not." She handed me the photo. "That's the last thing I'm giving you. If they find out, Anyway." She paused, glanced at Elaine's bench down by the water, then stepped back. "You know," she said, voice softer now, "your wife used to bake pies for the 4th of July potlucks. She always brought 2, one for the table and one for the old widow on lot 12 who didn't like crowds." I smiled. Elaine believed in quiet generosity. Ellen gave me a long look. "You remind me of her, except you don't stay quiet." She turned and left. Just like that. That night, I pinned the photo next to the agenda on the corkboard in my garage. Timeline on the left, photos and documents in the middle, open questions on the right. I wasn't just collecting proof anymore. I was building a map. Rachel walked in, glanced over it all. "You building a case?" I shook my head. "I'm building pressure." She nodded, then grinned. "And pressure makes cracks," I finished. "Let's keep pushing." The next morning, I stood in front of the shed behind the cabin, the one my father built when I was still in high school. He called it the bunker, even though it was just a glorified tool shack with rusted hinges and spiderwebs in every corner. I hadn't stepped inside it in almost a year. But that photo Ellen gave me kept gnawing at the back of my mind. Dean wasn't new. He'd been a shadow in this community for over a decade. That meant someone knew something, back then. Maybe my dad? And if he did, he would have written it down. He wrote everything down. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan. It smelled like sawdust, mold, and old paint cans, comforting and unsettling at once. Light filtered through the slats in strips, catching on dusk motes that spun like nervous dancers. I stepped inside. Tools lined the far wall. Most were untouched since my father passed. Old blueprints were rolled up and stacked in a bucket. I moved slowly, careful not to knock anything over, and pulled a tarp off the far corner. Underneath, I found what I was hoping for, his filing cabinet. 3 drawers, locked, but not tight. I jimmied the top one open with a flathead screwdriver and began flipping through labeled folders. Electrical, septic, dock repair permits, fishing licenses, typical. Then I reached the bottom drawer, locked, heavier. I had to yank hard to even rattle it. I got on my knees, flashlight clenched between my teeth, and felt around the bottom panel. And there it was, a small hex bolt screwed into the wood, my dad's version of a hidden latch. With a little twisting and one satisfying click, the bottom false floor lifted like a trapdoor. Beneath it sat a small metal box, dented, cold, and sealed with a rusted padlock. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Rachel stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. "You sure that's not full of old receipts?" "No," I said. "He only hid things that could start fires." She handed me the bolt cutters. "So light it up." The lock gave with a loud snap. Inside was a stack of envelopes wrapped in twine, a brown leather notebook, and a cassette tape labeled simply, Lakeview, Fall '97. Rachel picked up the notebook and flipped through it, pages and pages of notes, my dad's unmistakable handwriting, meetings, names, arguments, even diagrams. At the center of one page was a sketch of the lake property lines, original versus adjusted, and next to it, a note that said, "They shifted the markers without a vote, told the board it was cleanup. I checked the boundary stakes myself. They lied." Rachel read it aloud and then looked at me. "So the HOA redrew the lines decades ago?" I nodded slowly. "Looks like..." At the bottom of the same page, "If anything happens to me, this book proves I didn't fold. They bullied me." But I knew. My chest tightened, not with grief. Grief was old news, but with something heavier. Vindication. A terrible, delayed kind of justice. Rachel reached into the box again. "What's on the tape?" We didn't have a cassette player. Who does anymore? But then I remembered. There was an old portable stereo in the attic, packed away with our holiday junk. 15 minutes later, I had it wired and whirring. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Meeting started at 6:15 p.m. Present: Carl Leland, Margaret Holt, Dean Rusk. Rachel's eyes shot to mine. Discussion of lakeside reallocation, objection from Carl, recorded, dismissed without vote. Then a second voice, sharp, nasal. "It's internal, residents won't notice, just move the stakes." The tape clicked and whirred again. My father had recorded the meeting, and Dean was already manipulating things back then. We sat in silence when it ended. Rachel finally said, "They buried your dad's voice, but he left the shovel." I didn't answer. I just picked up the notebook, felt the leather between my fingers, and walked outside, down to the crooked bench. I sat there, the box on my lap, and whispered, "I hear you now, old man." Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a relay. And now it was my turn to run. The tape clicked off, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything my father left behind. I sat on the crooked bench, the metal box still on my lap, staring out over the lake like I was waiting for his voice to return through the wind. Rachel sat beside me, cross-legged, picking at the edge of the notebook. "Do you ever feel like he left this all for you?" she asked softly. I think he hoped he wouldn't have to. The bench creaked under our weight, the same way it always had. That sound used to mean peace. Now it meant memory, evidence, momentum. The next morning, I took the notebook, the tape, and the old water boundary sketches and drove into town. I didn't tell Rachel where I was going. I needed to look someone in the eye without distraction. Don Talbert hadn't aged a day past grizzled. Still had his sleeves rolled up to his elbows and the same half-empty jar of peppermints on his desk from 15 years ago. When I stepped into his cluttered office, he didn't even blink. "Well, if it isn't Carl Leland's kid," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you got your old man's eyes, and that same damn stubborn set to your jaw." "I brought something," I said, placing the box on the desk, "and I think it's what he couldn't finish." Don opened the notebook first. His fingers slowed as he read. "This is thorough," he murmured, "too thorough to be casual." He paused at the redrawn boundary map, then flipped it to the sketch with the altered property lines. "They made the lake markers?" he asked. Without approval, without a vote, he measured it himself. Don frowned, pulled out a county zoning reference chart from his drawer, and compared the diagrams. "This changes everything," he muttered. "See, if your dad's original deed lines hold up, and these notes are dated, notarized, and consistent, then the HOA's entire jurisdiction over this end of the lake is bogus." He tapped the tape recorder. "And if that voice on here is Dean Rusk, acting under HOA capacity without elected authority, you've got a documented abuse of power." "What do I do with it?" I asked. Don looked up at me, calm but deliberate. "You hold the line. You don't flash your hand until they're too comfortable to run. Start watching. Start gathering. Don't go legal until you've boxed them in so tight they call it mercy when you cut loose." I nodded. "They're planning something." They always are," he said, "so plan better." When I got back home, Rachel was standing at the mailbox with a flyer in her hand. Her expression said everything before she even spoke. "They're calling an emergency meeting," she said. "Thursday night, HOA Pavilion, Authority Expansion is the headline." I took the flyer. Clean font, no names, no contact, just a time, place, and threat written in polite language. "They're pushing the bylaw vote forward," I muttered, "trying to codify their control while people are still scared." Rachel crossed her arms. "They're not scared, they're confused, and Marcia feeds on confusion." Inside, we spread everything out on the kitchen table, my father's diagrams, the tape, the memo Ellen had slipped us, the photo from the 2009 meeting, and now this emergency meeting notice. It looked like a conspiracy board, but it wasn't. It was truth with receipts. I pinned the flyer at the top, labeled it in red ink. Phase 2, their overreach. Rachel leaned on the table. "So what's our next move?" We wait, I said. We let them come to the meeting full of confidence. And then we pull the rug. She grinned. You're getting good at this. I'm just catching up to what my father saw coming. I glanced out the window. The pine tree near the dock swayed gently in the breeze. The branch where the swing once hung was bare now, but I could still see Elaine there, barefoot, sketchbook in hand, legs tucked beneath her. This was never just a lake. It was a promise. And they were about to learn what happens when you try to rewrite a legacy with ink instead of roots. Ever find something your parents left behind that changed the way you see everything? A note, a photo, a voice? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever uncovered a truth that others tried to bury. Because sometimes, what they hide in silence becomes our loudest weapon. The morning before the emergency meeting, I drove to the county records office. Not to file anything, not yet, but to verify every last inch of what I was holding. The clerk behind the desk, a man named Joel with sleepy eyes and coffee breath, didn't ask too many questions. He pulled the microfoam records I requested and set me up with a cranky old viewer in the back. The reel slid into place and the screen flickered to life. My father's original property filings appeared frame by frame. Lake boundary drawings, dock permits, handwritten annotations. Then, several years later, a second filing, this one submitted by the HOA's legal liaison. Same lake, different lines. They'd moved the boundary stake exactly 11 feet and 6 inches inland from its original placement, enough to claim my family's dock, enough to fine, threaten, and humiliate us. But that second filing? It had no accompanying vote log, no community approval form, just a typed line. Administrative update, plat adjustment for clarity. Clarity my ass. I printed the documents, slid them into a manila folder, and walked out without saying a word. Back at the cabin, Rachel was already preparing. She had the meeting notice on the counter, plus a folder of her own, labeled photos of every HOA citation we'd received in the past year, time-stamped and cross-referenced. You're making a case file? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She smirked. I'm my mother's daughter. Elaine always did believe in receipts, whether it was for holiday returns or for handling bad behavior dressed in polite titles. We spread everything out again, this time not for review, but for strategy. I drew a simple map of the HOA meeting pavilion with arrows. You're sitting here, I told Rachel. Ellen usually stands in the back near the refreshments. If she shows, watch her face when Marcia speaks. Rachel nodded. You think she'll crack? I think she already has. She just needs to see someone else stand up first. I picked up the tape recorder and slid it into my jacket pocket, next to the printed boundary records and my dad's original deed copy. And then I made one final call, to an old friend from the fire department who now works as a freelance drone operator. Think you can fly a camera in and out without drawing heat? His laugh crackled through the speaker. You want overhead, crowd footage, or audio backup? All of it. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long golden fingers across the dock, everything was in place. At 5:45 p.m., I parked outside the HOA pavilion. Rachel walked beside me, steady and calm. I carried nothing but the folder and the weight of 2 generations' worth of quiet resistance. Inside, the room buzzed with that strained politeness that always shows up before a neighborhood fight. Chairs in rows, people murmuring but not really talking. Marcia stood at the front with her usual smug composure, powder blue blazer, clipboard hugged to her chest like a preacher's Bible. Dean hovered near the exit, arms crossed, sunglasses still on despite the dim fluorescent lights. As the meeting began, I took my seat, not in the back, front row, dead center. Marcia launched into her prepared remarks, all practiced warmth and tight smiles. This bylaw amendment is a necessary step in preserving the standards of our beautiful lakeside community. I could hear Rachel exhale beside me. Then, midway through her speech, I stood. No permission, no motion, just me, rising quietly. Before you vote, I said calmly, you should see the original property lines. Gasps. A few turned heads. Marcia froze. I held up the copy of the county plat map, then laid it on the front table. I followed it with the HOA's unauthorized revision and my father's notebook. And for those of you wondering if this is just family bias, I added, reaching into my pocket, you might want to hear this recording from a board meeting in 1997. Click. Dean's voice echoed through the small speaker. Just move the stakes, residents won't notice. The room changed. Mouths hung open. Ellen in the back dropped the cup she was holding. And Marcia, her hand was trembling just slightly, not enough for everyone to see, but enough for me. The room didn't erupt, it shifted. That subtle change you feel before a storm breaks, but after the pressure drops. Dean didn't say a word, he just stared at me, jaw clenched so tight you could hear the enamel grind. Marcia tried to recover. She reached for her clipboard, flipping pages like they might save her. "This is wildly out of order," she said, her voice a shade higher than usual. "Personal documents like these are not verified, not vetted." "They're from the county recorder's office," I cut in. "You can verify them yourself. Or would you prefer I email the drone footage from tonight's meeting to the local paper first?" That got a few murmurs. Ellen hadn't moved. She was still near the back, face pale, eyes fixed on the floor like she'd seen a ghost. Marcia started again, but this time she stammered. "There's a process. There's a chain of accountability. We can't be derailed by emotional appeals." I stepped forward and dropped my father's original deed copy beside her binder. It made a satisfying slap as it hit the table. "No one here is making an emotional appeal," I said. "I'm making a legal one." Rachel spoke next, firm, clear, just like I'd taught her. "And I'm here to remind the board that brandishing a weapon during a property inspection violates not only HOA policy but state law." Her words landed like a warning shot. Dean shifted his stance for the first time. Then Ellen finally stepped forward. Her footsteps were slow, hesitant. She looked as though she might faint, but her voice came through, hoarse but steady. "I was there," she said, "in 2009 when they made the decision to adjust the lake boundary. It wasn't voted on. It was buried in the minutes. I didn't stop it, but I should have." Silence again. A long, heavy silence. Then Marcia tried one last card. "Even if those documents are real, even if mistakes were made, this meeting is about future amendments. Let's not get distracted by ancient history." I turned to the crowd. History isn't ancient when the damage is still being done. That's when the slow shift in the room tipped. People started whispering again, but not in discomfort. This was different. This was alignment. A few neighbors stood. A man in a camo hat muttered, "About damn time." Rachel walked back to her seat, but I stayed standing. I wanted them to see that I wasn't finished, that this wasn't the end of some rant. This was the beginning of accountability. I said one last thing before stepping down. "I'm not here to destroy the HOA. I'm here to fix what it forgot it was supposed to be, a community, not a control board." After the meeting adjourned, Dean vanished like smoke. Marcia lingered, nodding tightly to anyone who approached, her mask back on. But I noticed she avoided eye contact with me, and especially with Ellen. Ellen came up to me after the crowd thinned. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at my father's notebook, now tucked under my arm. "I still have the originals," she said quietly. "From the old meetings, not just the minutes, the recordings, on CDs. Why didn't you bring them tonight?" She shook her head. "I needed to see if you'd show up for real, not just to yell, not just for revenge, but to stand up with facts. I brought everything I had." She gave a small, sad smile. "Then maybe it's time I do the same." Rachel joined us, her eyes flicking between us. "So what now?" Ellen took a deep breath. "Now I testify." The moment she said it, I realized something important had shifted. Not in policy, not in fines, but in people. It wasn't just my fight anymore. We were finally breaking through the wall they'd spent years building, one quiet voice at a time. By the time I got back to the cabin, I could feel it. Something had tilted, not just in the neighborhood, but in the air itself. Lighter, like people were finally breathing again. Rachel stayed quiet most of the drive home. She kept looking out the window, arms folded, jaw set, like she was reviewing every second of the meeting in her head. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself after a long shift, when the adrenaline fades and all you're left with is replay. "You did good," I said, breaking the silence. She didn't look at me. I kept thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been home that day, if Dean pulled that stunt and I was alone. I didn't have a good answer, so I gave her the truth. "That's why we finished this." We pulled into the driveway just as my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go, but instinct told me to answer. Mr. Leland? A woman's voice asked, nervous, young. Speaking. You don't know me, but I was at the meeting tonight. I work for the HOA office, clerical mostly. Look, I don't want trouble, but someone needs to hear this. She paused. I could hear her breathing on the other end. I don't know if this matters, but after everyone left, I stayed behind to clean up. I think the sound system was still on. I recorded something. That got my attention. Recorded what? I emailed it to you. Just check it. That's all I'm saying. She hung up before I could ask her name. Rachel and I went inside. I opened my laptop, heart thudding like I was expecting a confession from a ghost. There it was. An MP3 attachment, time-stamped 15 minutes after the meeting ended. I hit play. Marcia's voice came through sharp, low, no trace of the professional polish she used in public. They think they've got something, let them. We'll bury it just like Carl's complaints. Then Dean, you sure Ellen's not gonna fold? Marcia scoffed. She's weak, but not stupid. She knows if she talks, we've got enough dirt on her to make sure she never sleeps again. Dean laughed. Still, might be time to scare the kid a little. Send a message. Marcia didn't respond right away. Then, not yet. Let Graham swing. He'll hang himself if we wait long enough. Rachel's face went white. They were talking about me. I paused the audio. My hands were cold. They're not just playing politics, I said. They're circling the wagons. That night, I made 3 copies of the file, one on a flash drive, one uploaded to the cloud, one sent to Don Talbert. I also printed out transcripts, highlighted names, quotes, context. This wasn't just an internal squabble anymore. This was intimidation, suppression, and obstruction. The next day, Rachel and I drove into town again. We didn't go to Don's office this time. We went to the county ethics board. The woman at the front desk raised an eyebrow when I handed over the folder. What's this? Evidence, I said, of ongoing misconduct by a governing residential board, including tampering with public zoning records and threatening residents with violence. She looked skeptical until I slid the transcript forward. Marcia's words glared off the page. We'll bury it just like Carl's complaints. She took the folder and stood. Wait here. An hour later, Don joined us in the hallway, already halfway through reading the printouts. This is enough, he said. Not for the nuclear option yet, but close. They're slipping, Graham. You're making them sweat. What now? Rachel asked. He smiled grimly. Now we let them make the next mistake. We left the building and headed back toward the lake. The sun was starting to set behind the trees, gold streaking across the dock, the bench, the pine, the symbols of everything they'd tried to erase. They're not afraid of truth, Rachel said. They're afraid of being heard. I nodded. Then it's time we make sure everyone hears them. Ever caught someone saying what they shouldn't when they thought no one was listening? Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs to be recorded. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever overheard something that changed everything. We didn't sleep much after handing over the recording, not because we were scared, but because adrenaline has its own way of keeping the blood hot when the war turns from defense to offense. The next morning, Rachel brewed coffee without a word and handed me a cup. She didn't have to say anything. We were in sync now. This wasn't just my battle anymore. She had skin in it too. She always did. They just made the mistake of reminding her. My phone buzzed again, this time with a name I recognized. Don Talbert. They're cornered, he said flatly. Marcia tried to preempt the ethics complaint, sent a letter to the county board claiming you fabricated the recording. I laughed into the receiver. Of course she did. Don continued. But she slipped up. She filed it under the wrong statute. Claimed it was a recorded meeting without consent. But it wasn't a meeting. It was an open venue, public space, their own microphone. He let the silence hang for a beat. I think it's time. Time for what? For you to go public. That afternoon, Rachel and I drove to the local paper's office, the Lakeview Ledger, a modest building tucked between a shuttered sandwich shop and a pawn store. We met with a young editor named Cleo Ramirez, sharp-eyed and faster with a pen than anyone I've ever seen. I laid everything out, photocopies, maps, Ellen's coming testimony, and the now infamous audio recording. She listened to the clip twice, brows slowly rising with every line. You realize this will stir up more than just gossip, right? She asked. Good, I replied. Let them be uncomfortable. We've lived under that for years. She agreed to run a front-page feature for the weekend edition, complete with sidebars, quotes, and a timeline of events. But she added one request. "I want a photo," she said, "of you, the dock, the bench, where it all started." So that evening, Cleo met us down by the water. The sun was just touching the tree line, painting the lake gold again. I sat on Elaine's bench, same flannel shirt I wore the day Dean pulled his stunt, and stared straight ahead as the camera clicked. Cleo lowered her camera and said, "That's the look. People see it. No, it wasn't just about violations." "It never was," I told her. "This was about memory, family, and what happens when you push too far." The next day, the article went live online before print even rolled out. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Neighbors, former board members, even one of Marcia's old business partners who forwarded me a contract showing she funneled HOA funds into a shell company for landscape consulting. That's when I called Don again. "Did you see it?" He chuckled. "I'm holding the paper in my hands right now. You look like a man halfway through a job he's already decided to finish." "Because I am." Don cleared his throat. "There's one more move I think you should consider. It won't be easy." "I'm listening." "Buy-in." "Come again?" "Purchase the remaining unpaid HOA lots at auction. 3 are in delinquency. If you acquire them, you'll own enough voting share to call for a full board restructure, legally, permanently." I leaned back in my chair, stunned but grinning. "You're serious." As a courtroom, this is how you stop playing defense. That night, Rachel and I sat on the dock with our backs to the water, legs stretched out, cold air biting at our jackets. She stared at the stars while I quietly wrote out a wire transfer request to Don's title contact. "You're really gonna do it," she said. I nodded. They wanted control. And now they'll get it, just not the way they planned. The wind picked up. That same old pine by the bench rustled like it was nodding in approval. I showed up early. Not out of nerves, those were long gone, but because I wanted to watch them walk in one by one and feel the room tilt before a single word was spoken. The HOA board meeting had been moved from the pavilion to the town hall annex due to increased attendance and security concerns. That was code for, "We're losing control and we know it." I sat in the second row, not the front this time. Let Marcia scan the crowd and feel me in her peripheral vision. Rachel was to my left. Dawn sat to my right, a quiet anchor in a storm he was ready to steer. The room filled fast. Neighbors who hadn't shown up in years were suddenly seated with their arms folded, copies of the Lakeview ledgers spread across laps like shields. Ellen was there, holding a flash drive in one hand and the HOA charter in the other. Dean came in last. No sunglasses this time, just a hard stare and a twitch in his jaw that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Marcia took the mic like she always had, shoulders back, voice rehearsed, clipboard clutched like gospel. "We're here tonight," she began, "to address the unprecedented claims made against this board and to clarify the true intention behind recent bylaw expansions." Clarify. The word bounced off the walls like a dying echo. She continued, but fewer people were listening. The real moment had yet to come. Don leaned toward me and whispered, "You sure about letting Ellen go first?" "She's the crack," I said. "We're just the pressure behind it." Then Ellen stood. No announcement, no preamble, just a woman who'd carried the weight of silence long enough. She stepped up to the front, nodded politely to Marcia, who didn't return it, and turned to the crowd. "My name is Ellen Myers. I served on this board for 6 years, from 2006 to 2012. I witnessed the rezoning of lake property lines without community approval. I stayed silent. That was my mistake." A few gasps. Some heads turned toward each other. Marcia's smile froze. "I have original meeting recordings and archived minutes to support this," Ellen continued, holding up the flash drive. "They are available for review and have already been submitted to the County Ethics Board." She walked back to her seat without flinching. Then Don stood. "In light of these revelations," he said, "my client, Graham Leland, owner of 3 newly acquired delinquent HOA lots, is exercising his legal right to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in this board. Per the HOA's own charter." Marcia's voice snapped across the room. "This is procedural abuse. None of this was placed on the agenda." Dawn didn't even look at her. "You changed lake boundary lines without putting them on an agenda for years. Your objection is noted and denied." Someone in the back clapped. then 2 more. And just like that, momentum wasn't ours anymore. It belonged to the room. Rachel leaned forward, voice clear and steady. We've lived under this board long enough. My mother's dock was stolen on paper. My grandfather was pushed out with lies, and 2 weeks ago I was threatened at gunpoint by someone enforcing rules that didn't even legally apply. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because someone has to stop pretending this was ever fair. Marcia looked around the room. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her eyes darted toward Dean, but he wasn't backing her. He was frozen, staring straight ahead, hands clenched in his lap. Then a man from Lot 5 stood. I second the vote. Another voice, aye. And another, aye. The motion passed in minutes, quicker than anyone expected. Final. Quiet. Dean stood abruptly and stormed out without a word. Marcia followed, but not before one final glance back. Not at me, at the bench outside the window, the one she'd tried to find me for lighting after dusk. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That bench was still there. And she wasn't. The vote was over. The board was gone. And just like that, the noise that had haunted our neighborhood for years, the surveillance, the fines, the threats, finally stopped. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it takes a while to believe the fight is truly done. I walked the edge of the lake the morning after the meeting, boots crunching through damp pine needles, the air still heavy with the smell of moss and earth. The water was still, as if even it was waiting to see what would come next. Rachel found me out on the dock where I'd been standing for the better part of an hour, hands in my pockets, just breathing. No more board meetings, she said. I nodded. No more fines. No more golf carts doing slow drive-bys like we're under surveillance. And Dana? Gone, I said. Resigned quietly before the county ethics office sent their second notice. Word is he moved back east, left his house in foreclosure. She exhaled. Feels surreal. Yeah, but it's real. We sat on the old bench again, Elaine's bench. The curve in the seat still hugged your spine just right, like it remembered who it was built for. The wood, weathered and soft now, held every season, every argument, every moment that led to this. I handed Rachel the official letter I'd picked up from the clerk's office that morning. It confirmed what we'd fought for. The land boundaries were restored. The dock was officially and permanently ours. She scanned it and smiled, slowly. So, we really won. We didn't win, I said. We reclaimed. Later that day, I walked through the old HOA office building one last time. It was quiet now. Hollow. Just dust motes and old clipboards and the faint echo of power that no longer held ground. On the main desk, where Marcia once signed off on petty fines and intimidation letters, I left an envelope. Inside? A final check, payment for the last 3 HOA-controlled parcels, delinquent lots I quietly acquired during their chaos. By sundown, the paperwork was filed. The title had transferred. The board was dissolved. Not just voted out, but shut down permanently. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I hired the HOA, and I chose to end it. Not to replace one control system with another, but to give the neighborhood something different, something honest. We founded the Lakeview Preservation Committee instead, a volunteer-based group, no fines, no patrols, just folks who care about the lake and each other. Ellen joined first. So did the guy from Lot 5, who once muttered "I" under his breath, but now speaks loudly at every gathering. Rachel drew up a new sign for the welcome post, simple, bold letters. No board, just neighbors. The old HOA mailbox. I turned it into a free library. The first book we stocked was my father's notebook, laminated and tucked inside a binder, labeled "What Came Before." His handwriting, his fight, it all lives on here, in full view. I had one more bench made, not to replace Elaine's, but to sit at the top of the trail, overlooking everything we'd protected. This one is new wood, fresh stain, but with a small metal plaque that reads, "Some things are worth standing up for, especially when they tell you to sit down." That night, I watched the sunset from the dock, Rachel beside me, boots off, toes skimming the surface of the lake just like she used to as a kid. "I think she'd be proud," Rachel said, her voice softer now. "She always said this place deserved better," I replied. "Now it has it." Sometimes justice doesn't come loud. Sometimes it comes slow, steady, with paper trails and quiet pressure, and the courage to stand still when everything tells you to move. They pulled a gun on my daughter. So I bought the entire HOA. And now they're evicted. Not out of spite. Out of duty. If you've ever felt powerless against an HOA, or stood up for your land, your family, or your peace, share your story in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, because every time someone speaks up, a little more silence breaks. And maybe that's where real change begins.